Hello. In the previous video I made an assumption that absolute frame of reference and absolute time exist and that the speed of light does not depend on the speed of source, and proposed experiment to check that. In that video I forgot to make an assumption that we live in 3D space. I would say that it should be obvious if you look around yourself. So here is additional postulate for you: we live in 3D space. Today we are going to dig a little bit deeper. For over 100 years people are getting used to an idea that the speed of light is constant. Another idea that people got used to is that mass and energy are different names of the same entity. Probably the most famous formula tells us E equals mc squared, where E, energy, m, mass. These are simple ideas. Harder to understand what is photon, the elementary particle that light consists of. Scientists say that it does not have mass, but has momentum, so it can move other mass. How can that be? Textbooks say that photon has energy and that's what it can move other mass with. So we can say that photon is a chunk of energy moving with speed of light. If photon is a chunk of energy moving with the speed of light and mass and energy are different names of the same entity, how can it be that mass is not moving with the same speed? How can it be that mass is at rest? How can it be that the same entity have different behavior? Let's investigate what Einstein's special relativity can tell us. In special relativity there is interesting measure, spacetime interval. It has units of distance and measures some analog of distance between two events. These events happen in different points of space and time. Let's assume that distance in space between those events by each axis is delta x, delta y, delta z, and difference in time between them is delta t. Spacetime interval is calculated using this formula. Delta s squared equals delta tc squared minus delta x squared minus delta y squared minus delta z squared. Let's investigate what this formula really tells us about our universe. First we move everything but the delta tc squared to the left side of the equation. We get delta s squared plus delta x squared plus delta y squared plus delta z squared equals delta t multiplied by c squared. Now we divide both sides by delta t squared and what do we get? When we divide distance by time we get speed. So we get vs squared plus vx squared plus vy squared plus vz squared equals c squared. It's a math formula and it describes our universe, so it should mean something. We have speed by x, vx, speed by y, vy, speed by z, vz. And we have some fourth speed vs. If it's not movement in any direction of space, then what it can be? It has to be some movement without actual movement. Movement at the same place. I have an idea what kind of movement that can be. It can be internal, cyclic motion. Let's investigate what speed that internal motion has. Let's assume that the body is at rest and that Vx, Vy, Vz, all three equal 0. In this case we get Vs squared equals c squared. So for body that is at rest its internal speed equals c. So something has internal speed c. What is that something? It should be the matter, because there is nothing else. So we come to a conclusion that the speed of matter is always the same and always equals c. Either matter moves in some direction or moves internally. And that follows from the formulas of Einstein's special relativity. Do you see the difference? Not the speed of light is constant but the speed of all matter is constant, in the absolute frame of reference. That also means that photons consist of matter too. Because photon consists of matter, it has momentum and energy and can move other mass. Nothing strange. Let's return back to what the spacetime interval actually is. Its exact internal distance passed by watches that travel between two events while measuring time delta t. Cool. If photon moves with speed c, it means it does not have internal motion. Also we know that photon has no rest mass. But what does it have? Let's give a name to that kind of mass. Let's call it movement mass. Let's mark it as m1. Let's mark rest mass m0. In this case photon, as well as any other particle, consists of two types of mass, m0, the rest mass, and m1, the movement mass. So total mass of photon as well as of any other particle equals rest mass plus movement mass. M equals m0 plus m1. This mass was called relativistic mass back in Einstein's time, but was forbidden after some time. Why? Hard to believe, but seems like they don't have any idea what it is. So why the speed is limited in our universe? Maybe because speed is constant in it. We can also say that there is no speed in it at all. Our movement is a sum of small movements in different directions, and the maximum movement speed is when you move straight like photons do. And you cannot move straighter than straight. That's why speed is limited. Isn't this conclusion beautiful? Why is it impossible to reach the speed of light for a particle with rest mass? Because it has rest mass, has internal motion, and doesn't move straight. You can add any amount of movement mass, but you still don't move straight when you make cyclic motion or any other motion in different directions. Why particle does not have exact position in quantum physics? Because it always moves with the speed of light and always changes position. To speed ourselves up we will need to add more and more movement mass, but it would have less and less impact on our speed. You can see this in this simulation where each next particle gets additional chunk of movement mass, but still struggles to reach maximum speed. Now let's explain why moving clock would tick slower in a universe in which mass has constant speed. What is clock? It's some device making some periodic movement. For example, Einstein's light clock, photon that moves with constant speed left and right between two mirrors. Actually, that Einstein's clock is used in special relativity too. Imagine that this is the photon and it moves left and then right. To make that light clock move up, speed it up, we need to add movement mass that moves it up. Because photon moves up, it moves slower left and right. As a result, one full cycle of the light clock will take more absolute time. For physicists that moves with that clock it will always be one tick of clock, but in reality he will get time dilation. Here how it would look depending on the amount of movement mass added to the light clock. As you can see, it looks much like the light clock from special relativity, but for absolute time and constant speed of matter. If we assume that local time flow depends on the amount of internal motion, we can get all the formulas from special relativity. And I will do that in one of the future videos. I cannot do that now as there is one widely used mathematical trick that needs to be explained in a separate video before that. A trick that gave us Schrödinger cat and many other miracles. So far I need to sum up that per my postulates we live in a 3D universe, not 4D as special relativity tells us. 4 dimensions of special relativity are only logical dimensions: move by x, move by y, move by z, don't move. Saying that we live in 4 dimensions because of that is like saying that die lives in 6 dimensions because it has 6 sides. Again, more on those logical dimensions in videos to follow. Please note that with absolute frame of reference and constant speed of matter in it we get exact predictions for every possible situation, so I'm afraid there will be no place for paradoxes in it. But from another side I'm afraid there is no absolute relativity in it, and I will show that in later videos. So it might be not easy to predict what would happen with the tween-from-tweens paradox that speeds up to a speed near c. I'm afraid he will fall apart long before that speed because his rest mass will be too small comparing to his movement mass, and that will affect his internal processes and molecular stability. As for the question, why the speed of light does not depend on the speed of source and fast source emits light in a form of cone. This was the postulate in my previous video. Well, it's a long story, but in short, if body moves in some direction, it means that it physically consists primary of movement in that direction. Its mass mainly consists of that direction, and it does not have much chances to generate photon of any other direction than its own. So it's a question of statistics. But more on this, much later, in another video. Several words about momentum. What actually is it? Here is the formula for it. P equals mv. As you remember, I assumed that we can divide all mass into rest mass, m0, and movement mass, m1. Rest mass makes no movement in absolute frame of reference, so its momentum is 0. And all momentum of a body is the momentum of its movement mass that moves with the speed of light. P equals mv equals m1c. So we can come to a conclusion that momentum is a measure of the movement mass of a body. Its movement mass multiplied by c. We can say that movement mass pulls rest mass of the body. And conservation of momentum is actually conservation of movement mass. Conservation of mass. Or we can also say that it's conservation of direction of mass. I hope you liked the video. It might happen that now you know about the nature much more than the professors who teached you. Of course the probability is very low, but who knows? Sometimes miracles do happen. In this case the miracle would be that our universe might appear to be much more simple and intuitive than we could ever imagine. As simple as heads and tails. Or I can be wrong. Let's check. The predictions are in the previous video. And more predictions to come in future videos. I will show you how unexpectedly logical and intuitive our universe might appear to be. Maybe even much more logical than we wish it to be. If you like these ideas and want them to be checked by physicists, please press like and subscribe. And let's launch a revolution. Let's bring the logic back. Thank you for your attention.